The United States is the world's premier military power, fielding advanced equipment and superior doctrine that no other nation can hope to match. But if World War III kicked off today, the U.S. would be out of combat equipment within months. This is the lesson that the Department of Defense has learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Our stockpiles aren't big enough, and all that high-tech equipment turns into a massive liability very quickly in a prolonged conflict. Both Russia and Ukraine are feeling the squeeze after half a year of high-tempo combat operations. Russia has lost hundreds of vehicles, and it's estimated that it'll take 10 years just to replace the losses in heavy equipment it's suffered so far. Ukraine is burning through 3,000 artillery shells a day, with Russia using up to an estimated 20,000 shells a day. Both sides have already burned through their initial supply stocks. Ukraine has had 500,000 shells provided by NATO countries to supplement their stockpiles. Meanwhile, Russia has had to dip into its reserves not allocated or expected to be used in this conflict, putting it into a perilous position and forcing it to turn to North Korea for resupply. But the Hermit Kingdom is unlikely to supply much past a few weeks' worth of ammunition, as it too has a great need for vast reserves of artillery, the only weapon with which it can effectively threaten South Korea and its American allies. Modern war consumes hardware and ammunition at truly frightening rates, especially when peer or near-peer adversaries are facing off against each other. In the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel lost 400 of its 1,700 tank stockpile, losing an average of 1.1% of its entire tank force every single day of the combat. The Arab forces faced far worse, losing up to 2,300 tanks, or a whopping 63% of their tank force in just 20 days of fighting. During the Battle of Kursk in World War II, Germany lost 14% of its tank forces every single day over 2 weeks, forcing it to call in reserves and ultimately losing 10% over the initial force. On the American side, the average infantry battalion lost 2.6% of its men every day, requiring intense and continued resupply. But in a modern global war, replacing manpower is infinitely cheaper than replacing hardware. The United States today fields 11 armored brigade combat teams, each with approximately 87 Abrams, most of them upgraded to the latest variant. Assuming a loss of just 1% per day, 9.57 Abrams would be destroyed, abandoned, receive enough battle damage to require repair back home, or captured by the enemy. By the second month of high-intensity combat ops, the U.S. Army would be down to half of its original tank forces, requiring it to dip into its reserve of 2,300 Abrams. That might sound like a significant number that should see the U.S. through a lengthy engagement, but most of these tanks are very old models, hailing back from the late Cold War. With smaller cannons, antiquated fire control, and less capable armor, these Abrams would not have the capability of modern variants. The only bright side is that the enemy would likely be seeing severe attrition as well. Thus, those old Abrams would likely be facing equally old threats, such as the T-72s, leveling the playing field a bit. Currently, the U.S. Army only has plans to produce 22 brand new tanks in the fiscal year of 2023, with 30 being produced in 24 and 53 in 2025. The reason for these dismal figures is twofold. First, the U.S. Army is still busy upgrading active Abrams to the latest SEP package. Secondly, the Army is having to make some hard choices on production of new hardware versus funding new technologies needed to maintain America's unparalleled edge in combat. The rate of technology acquisition is vastly outstripping our ability to manufacture hardware, and when it comes to modern war, there's nothing worse than showing up to today's fight in yesterday's tank. Just ask the Russians, who are now being forced to show up not in yesterday's tank but last month's tank. But it's not just the swiftly evolving nature of technology that's a problem, it's that all that tech is incredibly expensive. Adjusted for inflation, an M48 Patton, America's first-generation main battle tank, cost $2.8 million to produce back in World War II. Meanwhile, a fully modern Abrams cost nearly 4 times as much at $9 million. In the Second World War, it would take $252 million to fully equip a modern equivalent armored brigade combat team, while today, it takes $810 million. Even the U.S.'s massive defense budget can't support that type of spending for a long time. And this is only tanks because the U.S. Army has a plethora of other big-ticket items needed for it to maintain its unchallenged domination of the battlefield. The vaunted Apache attack helicopter costs over $30 million a unit, and even the average infantry soldier is now equipped with anywhere between $10,000 and $18,000 worth of high-tech gear. If the Army wants to continue being the most technologically advanced force in the world, it needs to make sacrifices in order to fund new technologies, and that means dramatically slashing the physical production of hardware in favor of research and development costs for tomorrow's war. But that leaves the United States in serious risk of not having enough equipment to fight today's war. The Department of Defense predicts it can ramp up production on modern Abrams to about 20 a month if it needed to, which is a great improvement over today's dismal annual figures. However, that means it can only replace about 2 days' worth of combat losses every single month. It doesn't take long to figure out that after 3 to 4 months of hard fighting, the primary vehicle of the U.S. Army is not going to be the tank, but rather much cheaper to produce gun trucks and the like. In 2018, the Army asked Congress for extra money to buy 150,000 artillery shells in order to be prepared for high-intensity combat ops. As Ukraine has taught us all by now, that number is absurdly low, forcing the Department of Defense to question just how many bombs, missiles, and shells it really needs to keep on supply at all times. With nearly 1 million shells given to Ukraine so far, U.S. reserves are starting to wane. And artillery shells aren't things you can just keep on a shelf indefinitely. While they are infinitely simpler than, say, a precision-guided missile, a 155mm shell still has a shelf life of about 20 years. That means that all of our vast reserves from the Cold War, when we were prepared to fight a true high-intensity conflict, are all gone by now, along with the industrial capacity to replace them. And that's America's biggest problem in waging another high-intensity war. We can't build things anymore. In 1993, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the White House had a famous Last Supper with representatives from dozens of different major defense contractors. The message relayed to them was simple: half of you are going to go out of business. Sure enough, over the next 5 years, the defense industry was forced to consolidate, with a huge amount of mergers and some contractors simply going out of business entirely. All those mergers meant factories were also being shut down, and eventually sold off or torn down for real estate. Restarting wartime production isn't as simple as just reopening old factories that simply don't exist anymore, nor as easy as simply expanding production at the factories that do remain. Back in World War II, automobile manufacturers were able to switch from making cars to making tanks with only moderate difficulties. Today's tanks, however, are far more technologically advanced, requiring not just specialized tools to build them, but highly trained and educated individuals as well. Rosie the Riveter won't be showing up to a Ford factory today to build an Abrams, though 5 months later she might indeed be welding armor plates onto Ford pickup trucks because that's the only vehicle the U.S. can rush out to combat troops in dire need. To further add to U.S. difficulties, consolidation of the defense industry has led to many single points of failure in its acquisitions chain. For example, only a single contractor provides electronic screens for U.S. aircraft, and only a single company can repair the Navy's propellers. This leaves the U.S. extremely vulnerable to disruption due to attacks or sabotage. So, if we know that the U.S. is not ready for a high-intensity war, why don't we just invest in increased manufacturing capability now in case we need it tomorrow? The problem with this is that the U.S. government does not like to spend money that it doesn't see an immediate return on. Building a new tank plant that's just going to be mothballed until a major war starts will cost billions, and not see any return on that investment until a major war actually happens. Instead, the U.S. government would prefer to put that money to direct use by funding new technology or upgrading old equipment. Empty factories are expensive and require high maintenance costs, but we get nothing out of it in return until we absolutely need it. It's a risk-reward ratio that's highly disfavorable for the U.S. military. The U.S. isn't completely doomed, however, as these severe rates of attrition are only applicable in peer or near-peer conflicts. The force that does exist today is so extremely capable that it might never suffer such extreme losses. During Desert Storm, the U.S. and its allies faced the world's fourth-largest military with one of the densest air defense networks in the world. But revolutionary technologies such as GPS and precision-guided munitions allowed America to absolutely rout the Iraqi military at a cost that's frankly absurdly small. The entire coalition suffered only 31 tanks destroyed or disabled, while Iraq had 3,300 tanks destroyed. The U.S. military superiority carried the day, inflicting such an incredible defeat on a Soviet-trained and equipped military that the Soviet Union and China both immediately threw their old war plans out the window and rushed to develop new ones to counter the U.S. 10 years later, during the second invasion of Iraq, the U.S. was able to decimate the Iraqi military with only 5 divisions, a figure that nearly everyone at the Department of Defense warned would lead to battlefield catastrophe. However, once again, advancement in technology had made smaller, nimble U.S. forces far superior to even greater Iraqi numbers. Today, the only near-peer opponent the U.S. faces is China, and while China is shaping up to be a capable foe, it's still unknown just how well China could fare in modern war. Its last war was in the 1970s against Vietnam, and it lost that conflict. If the U.S.'s doctrinal and technological edge holds, then perhaps there's no need for vast amounts of equipment reserves. The fact that America enjoys a whole host of global allies and partners also means that in any major conflict, it's going to bring a lot of friends to the fight, while its opponents will struggle to find any. Perhaps we've finally seen the end of major conflicts due to America's massive edge in a largely united world order. But if we haven't, the United States risks fighting World War III in gun trucks and other low-tech solutions that might spell disaster. As it stands, that disaster is more likely than ever. Now go watch how the US lost the hypersonic missile war, or click this other video instead.